Welcome to This Is Chrome. They gotta get sold.
Google has been running into a bit of legal hot water lately. The speculation right now, or at least what they are proposing as a potential solution, would be that Google may actually be forced to sell Chrome. Now, I think we should start this out at the very beginning by saying, I think it's a little bit of an unlikely prospect that Google would really have to do this. But let's talk a little bit about it. If it happens, why it would happen, and what would happen to the internet if Chrome actually had to be forcibly removed from Google. Because I'll tell you, Chrome is the backbone of a lot more of the internet than you might think.
I remember growing up when Chrome came out.
I do too.
And it was a huge deal, like to switch to Chrome from using like Internet Explorer. You weren't cool unless you used Chrome.
And it was legitimately a better browser. So Google are currently in the middle of 2 lawsuits. There are 2 main complaints from the American government, as well as some of this is also being shared with the European Union. But basically, it kind of boils down to this. The US government has found that Google have basically become a monopoly in 2 areas. The first suit was talking about how they have got dominant market share in search. Last I checked, Google has something like 90% search market share. So the rest I think is like Bing and like a little bit of DuckDuckGo. But like, I mean, Google have paid, Samsung and Apple and all these other companies to be the default search engine, which has helped them to be the 90%, yada, yada. They've lost that case. Now it is just a matter of deciding how they settled it or whatever the case is. So that's one half of this. Then there's another case, which is wrapping up as we sort of speak, which is discussing how Google has a monopoly in advertising. The long story short is there are 2 different sort of legal actions, and both of which are saying, hey, Google, you're too big, you're too much of a monopoly, you need to make some changes. Now, again, we're talking about this before, like, they can be found guilty.
Whatever fine that they get charged with, they could just pay it.
Which is, I will say, gonna be massive.
No amount of massive fine would, like, when you're that level of monopoly, it's just like, okay.
Well, the government may actually say, hey, no, we're not just gonna take your money. I mean, we're gonna take your money, but we're not just gonna take your money. You actually have to make changes. So one of the theories here, probably the most drastic one, is that Google would have to be forced to sell Chrome. Now, again, they may have to do less important things like sell half of their ad business or firewall this or that. Well, like, we don't know. But I think the thing that's really interesting, and the thing that they have straight up said, hey, we want you to consider, is selling Chrome. Chrome has expanded a lot since the 2008, 2009 days when it was a wee little beta browser on Windows XP.
A lot of us are still beta browsers, I'll tell you that much. It's hard to not bump into Chrome on the internet. Chrome itself is the most popular browser, but then chances are, whatever browser you're using is Chromium.
Which is a key distinction here, not to get super into the technical sort of weeds. Just the same way that Android exists as an open source platform, it's the same kind of thing with Chrome and Chromium. So Chromium is an open source browser. Microsoft Edge is based on Chromium. Opera is based on Chromium. A large number of smaller browser projects are all based on Chromium. Those are essentially taking the basic building blocks of the browser and then adding all your stuff on top. Whereas Chrome does the same thing, except Chrome is like the sort of the one true browser that has all the Google features directly built in. So Google run the Chrome store for extensions, which most of these other browsers take advantage of. Like, there's a lot of power here.
Whoever owns Chrome technically controls Chromium. Opera is not owned by Google.
No.
But they're subject to Google's rules. Wherever Chrome goes, this is gonna have a ripple effect across the entire internet.
The only other browser besides true, like actual like browser engine, besides Apple Safari and Google's Chrome, is good old Mozilla Firefox.
It comes down to, when you're this massive, who would, but more importantly, who could?
Yeah.
And there are some, like...
Yahoo offered to buy Chrome. That's where we can start this. Can we just start out by just discussing the idea that even if Google are forced to sell Chrome, it would be worth an ungodly amount of money? Immediately, you're knocking off Yahoo and stuff, because like, you have to be a company who
Yahoo's
actually
got
pull
like
money
$27 in the bank.
So who could actually buy Chrome? In this theoretical universe, who could actually buy, realistically, Google Chrome if it was forced to be on the market?
Apple could buy Google tomorrow and like still have money left over.
Who else we got?
Amazon.
Amazon, yeah, I could see a scenario there, because Apple already have a browser, like it's a little weird, but super complex.
There's problems with all of them, but like Samsung, because people forget that Samsung has their own browser. Samsung sells a couple more tanks, and then suddenly they got a browser.
If you want to be a real sick psychopath, you can use Google Chrome with Bing as your default.
How about we just say China?
There's no
China in some way would like
zero shot. That would be shut down in every possible level by every possible person.
I want China to buy Chrome just to watch the Senate hearings on that.
Microsoft actually might be one of the strongest options because they already use Chrome for Edge, and then OpenAI, who has actually gone on record as saying, hey, if you have to sell Chrome, we'll buy it, which would be a very interesting move. OpenAI are such a frothy, exciting startup that if they said, hey, we want to buy Chrome, they would be able to raise from investors.
A venture capitalist would flock to that.
People will be like, oh, hey, OpenAI is about to get 1 billion new users. Sign me up. I know that you always might think, oh, hey, you could just download Chrome for free. Ha ha ha. But like, this is one of the nuclear weapons of the tech space. There's no way around the idea that Chrome is such a huge, important thing. Now, I think it's worth talking about how browsers make money. You hear these things like, oh, Google paid Apple $20 billion in a couple years ago, whatever, to be the default in Safari and whatnot. The vast majority of the money that browsers make is because if you are a search engine, you're going to pay a small kickback to be the default and to be included. If I'm using Firefox, and Google has paid to be the default, which they have paid to be the default pretty much everywhere. Every time I go into my Firefox search and type something in, Mozilla is making a small amount of money from Google on that search. Part of the reason why they sort of lost the initial suit was because Google were trying to argue that, hey, we're so good, everyone wants to use this, and the judge goes, well, then why are you paying people to use your software?
And it's because of that, because Google say, okay, well, we're gonna use our search engine, which is optimized with our ads side of things. We can push the ads that we want, which is what people have paid us more money to do.
Yeah. In 2020, 88.8% of Firefox's revenue was from royalties.
If we did not have search engines paying, browsers would go back to being paid. If you go back to use an old computer, you realize it took 45 seconds for one page to load.
Okay, that's different. That is internet speeds, not...
Well, everything was slow.
Yeah.
It does seem like there are just a really small handful of companies who could actually do something with this. We're sort of theory crafting right now. I think that the smart money is that Google will have to break some pieces off, but they would sort of hold Chrome to their chest. However, if Chrome was really sold off, I would add one more company, which theoretically would make a ton of sense, but also would be probably worse than Google. Meta. It would be just as bad and worse. Isn't that lovely?
I feel like that's any company that buys Chrome is going to be saying that. You look at all right, Amazon, if they bought it, suddenly every search engine, like everything that you search on there is going to be...
It's Bezos.
Yeah, here's an Amazon link for it.
Yeah.
Whoever owns Chrome, you're automatically in monopoly territory because, as we're saying, when you have 90% of the market, that's the definition of a monopoly. So Apple makes a lot of sense. So Apple's also going through their own legal issues of similar things, especially in the EU, of being monopolies. So if they owned Chrome, if they leave that as a open platform,
but what does Apple get out of that?
It's goodwill from the EU. They're having to change almost everything that they do for the EU.
Kicking and screaming, yes.
Yeah, so what they can say is here's us. We're gonna buy this. They go to the EU and say, here's us opening our platform to everyone, and then they dictate the terms of things.
I think none of it feels right, and I think that highlights how not right any of it was in the first place.
Correct. Yeah.
You could break up Chrome if you really needed to. You take the Chromium part, you take it out of Google's hands, you give that to Microsoft or something. That's developing the technical backbone. You take the actual Google browser, the actual thing that people use, and OpenAI buys that, and then Google have a partnership with it. I don't think this is the right move. I think, though, that is almost just as feasible as if some other company just said, hey, we're just gonna scoop the whole thing up. All of the huge tech players, if any of them have the full power of Chrome, you've made no progress in anything because they're all going to be just as bad of actors.
Even if it's a company that buys it that doesn't have a search engine attached to it, the data of a billion users, that's the valuable bit. They can turn around and sell that data for whatever they need to all over the place. What it comes down to is you're not buying the browser, you're buying the data.
What company can you just walk out and go, I'm going to buy 1 billion users, the entire internet? That's some nefarious sort of stuff.
What about Kmart? One of the would-be suitors is Perplexity.
They are in the middle of making a browser for themselves, right? So just completely separate of Chrome.
We do browser videos a couple times a year. One of the things that I see a lot is someone well, I don't use Chrome because I use Opera. We see a ton of people who think that whatever Chrome is doing doesn't affect them because they're not using Chrome specifically.
Yeah.
But like on the back end, it totally does. For most people, if Amazon bought this, now you're using an Amazon browser. Are you going to build your own browser? And I'm sure we'll get a comment of, I built my own browser a bunch of times and I only use that.
That's like saying I'm going to come up with my own brand new from scratch operating system in 2025. As a user, every browser, for the most part, is pretty good at this point. Like, there's not a lot of like, oh, hey, you notice a huge speed difference, or you notice like features. It's more like personal preference.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. I used to do browser test videos all the time. And there used to be huge differences. Like Internet Explorer sucked, and then suddenly Chrome was really fast, and then Firefox was better. Those days are kind of over. And so it's like, hey, you can use whatever you want. And importantly, every browser, even Chrome, allows you to change your search engine. If you don't want to use Google, you can use Bing. I will say, I actually have spent time, I go back and forth. I use Google more a little bit now, but like Bing is perfectly acceptable. DuckDuckGo is perfectly acceptable. There are other options, right? None of this makes a huge difference to, I think, any individual person. I think it's more so about like, if big things like Chrome get sort of broken up, sold off, stripped for parts, whatever the case is, that's the thing I think could be incredibly impactful. And while Google have been, I think, a bit of a bad faith actor in some of these things, that all being said, are the alternatives better? Because I don't think they are.
I mean, I just don't see a scenario where we don't hear about the exact same lawsuit in 5-10 years down the road, unless some nonprofit comes in.
That would be really cool. It's not going to happen, but that would be nice.
In my perfect little head,
Yep.
Chrome goes away. Then all the Chromium companies are allowed to, take their existing thing and then build it themselves from there.
Your sort of pitch here is that Google are no longer the main stewards of Chromium.
Yeah.
I think the main thing, though, is that they're going to follow the dollars and cents. And I think they're going to say, hey, you're not allowed to pay people for these kind of exorbitant fees.
I also just think that like whatever fee they get charged, they could just look at it and say, we make enough money doing this that we could just pay the fine.
Maybe. But the government's not dumb. They know they could just crank that number up to a point.
He said the government's not dumb. When you're rich enough,
Yep.
a bunch of laws are optional. It's all bad.
This is all bad.
It's all bad.
It seems like, when you first start thinking about this, like, oh, Chrome might have some changes or whatever, like, it seems like good. But you start like mind gaming it. What's the best case scenario? OpenAI build ChatGPT into Chrome GPT?
But what happens when OpenAI goes bankrupt because they haven't made any money ever? What happens when that company goes out of business?
Chrome is the weapon that is too powerful for anyone to wield, and yet Google, for all the problems that they may have, are still probably the best steward of it. But maybe, just maybe, you should download yourself a little bit of Firefox.
Polymarket has a 6% odds.
I take those odds. I think that sounds about right. Maybe like 8-9%.
Let us know who you think should buy Chrome. Like, follow, subscribe, and let us know what browser you're using that's totally Chromium already. So it's just, you're all using Chrome.
Firefox is a legitimate option.
I only use Netscape Navigator and AOL Online.